The shouting erupted like a thunderclap. The woman's heels clicked with fury as she stomped toward the front of the city bus, eyes locked on the elderly man seated in the handicapped section. "That seat is for people who need it," she snapped, her designer purse swinging over her shoulder like a weapon. Her voice rang out, sharp and entitled, full of the kind of confidence that comes from always getting your way. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. The man she towered over didn't even flinch. He just sat there, back straight, hands folded on a cane that looked older than most people on the bus, carved with symbols few recognized anymore. His clothes were simple, pressed but faded. His shoes, shined but scuffed at the edges. His face was deeply lined, each wrinkle a chapter in a story no one had asked to hear. The woman kept yelling, "Get up. I'm talking to you," she barked, as if he were deaf, or worse, beneath her. But the man said nothing. Not because he was afraid. Because he'd learned long ago that some things, like pride, like truth, speak louder in silence. He had survived jungle ambushes, carried brothers out of burning wreckage, and watched too many good men fall. An angry woman on a bus couldn't shake him. But 3 rows back, someone did move. A young soldier, in casual clothes but with the bearing of someone who had stood at attention more times than he could count, stood up and calmly stepped into the aisle. No words, just a slow, deliberate roll of his sleeve. On his forearm, a tattoo, a unit insignia with a date, a phrase, and coordinates etched beneath it. One glance at the old man, then a silent nod. "That man," the soldier said, loud enough for every passenger to hear, "is the reason I wear this." The bus fell into stunned silence. The woman blinked, her mouth suddenly dry. The soldier stood protectively beside the old man now, eyes unwavering. Someone at the back of the bus clapped. Then another, and another. The old man didn't move, didn't need to. Respect had returned to him not through confrontation, but through quiet, earned reverence. The woman turned, red-faced, and walked away without another word. As the bus rumbled forward, the young soldier remained standing, one hand lightly resting on the old man's shoulder. No more shouting, no more sneering, just the sound of a city moving, and one small corner of it remembering what honor looks like. Welcome to the silent ranks. Before we dive deeper into this incredible encounter, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe these powerful moments of human connection deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're building a community that recognizes the heroes among us, even when they don't wear their stories on the outside. Route 47 ran from the financial district to the Veterans Hospital on the east side of the city. It was one of those buses that carried everyone. Office workers heading home from downtown towers, students with backpacks and earbuds, elderly passengers going to medical appointments, service members traveling to and from the base. A cross-section of humanity sharing space for 30 minutes at a time, most of them strangers who would never see each other again. The bus was nearly full that Thursday afternoon. Rush hour traffic meant longer stops, more passengers, more tension as people jostled for seats and space. The driver, Marcus Williams, had been working this route for 8 years. He had seen everything. Fights over seats, arguments about fare, people having breakdowns about jobs and relationships and life in general. He had learned to keep his eyes on the road and let passengers sort out their own problems unless things got physical. But this felt different. This felt like something that was going to escalate beyond words. The woman causing the disturbance was Victoria Ashford, 52 years old, real estate attorney, BMW in the parking garage, penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor, the kind of person who normally took taxis or had her assistant drive her places. She was only on the bus because her car was being serviced and she had an important meeting across town that couldn't be rescheduled. She had gotten on at the financial district stop already irritated about having to use public transportation, already annoyed that she would have to sit next to people who couldn't afford better options, already looking for reasons to be upset about an experience that she considered beneath her station. When she saw the elderly man in the handicapped section, she decided he was the perfect target for her frustration. The man she was harassing was Thomas Chun, 81 years old, Army veteran, Purple Heart recipient, widower living on a small pension in a studio apartment near the hospital where he received treatment for diabetes and the lingering effects of exposure to Agent Orange during his 3 tours in Southeast Asia. Thomas rode this bus twice a week. To the hospital for dialysis. To the pharmacy for medications he couldn't afford but needed to stay alive. To the social services office to navigate the bureaucracy that determined whether he qualified for assistance programs. He knew most of the regular drivers. He always paid his fare even when it meant skipping meals. He never caused trouble, never complained, even when younger passengers took the seats reserved for elderly and disabled riders. But today was different. Today Victoria Ashford had decided that he didn't deserve to sit where he was sitting. "You can't just take up space here," she said loud enough for the entire bus to hear. "These seats are for people who actually need them. You look fine to me. You can stand like everyone else or get off and walk." Thomas looked up at her with tired eyes. His voice was soft but clear when he finally spoke. "Ma'am, I have a medical condition. I use this seat because standing for long periods is difficult for me. I'm not trying to cause any trouble." Victoria's voice got louder, more aggressive. She was performing now, playing to the audience of passengers who were pretending not to watch while recording everything on their phones. "Medical condition," she repeated with obvious sarcasm. "You're probably just lazy. Probably one of those people who games the system, takes advantage of programs meant for people who really need help. I work 60 hours a week. I pay taxes. I shouldn't have to stand while someone like you sits in comfort." The bus continued rolling through downtown traffic, but the atmosphere inside had changed completely. Other passengers were shifting uncomfortably. Some were looking out the windows, trying to ignore the confrontation. Others were openly staring, waiting to see how far this would go. Thomas didn't respond to her accusations. Didn't try to explain his medical history or justify his right to sit in a seat that was legally designated for people exactly like him. He just gripped his cane a little tighter and looked straight ahead like he was trying to disappear into the worn fabric of the bus seat. Victoria interpreted his silence as weakness, as admission that she was right. She stepped closer, crowding his space, invading the small bubble of dignity he was trying to maintain. "I'm talking to you," she said. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Show some respect for people who actually contribute to society." That's when Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez decided he had heard enough. Michael was 26 years old. Third-generation military. He had just finished his second deployment in Afghanistan and was on his way to the Veterans Hospital for a routine appointment. He was wearing civilian clothes, but his bearing, his haircut, his posture, everything about him screamed military, even when he wasn't in uniform. He had been watching the confrontation unfold for several minutes, had seen how the elderly man refused to engage with his tormentor, had recognized something familiar in the way Thomas carried himself despite his age and frailty. Something that spoke to Michael on a level that civilians wouldn't understand. Michael stood up slowly. He was tall, lean, muscled in the way that came from real physical training, not gym workouts. When he moved, other passengers instinctively gave him space. Not because he was threatening, but because he projected the kind of quiet authority that came from leading men in combat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I think you need to leave this gentleman alone." Victoria turned toward him, her anger finding a new target. Her voice was sharp, dismissive, designed to cut down anyone who dared challenge her authority. "Excuse me," she said. "This is none of your business. This is between me and him. He's taking up space that other people need, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that's okay." Michael took a step closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present. Just there in a way that made it clear he wasn't going to back down. "Actually, it is my business," he said. "That gentleman is sitting in a seat he has every right to occupy. You're harassing him for no reason other than your own convenience. And that makes it everyone's business." Victoria looked him up and down, taking in his civilian clothes, his young face, his apparent lack of any official authority. She decided he was just another bleeding heart liberal who didn't understand how the real world worked. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded. "Some kind of social justice warrior? Some kind of hero? Let me tell you something, kid. The world doesn't work on feelings. It works on results. And people who don't contribute don't get to take from people who do." Michael nodded slowly, like he was considering her words, like he was weighing them against something else, something more important. "You want to know who I think I am," he said. "You want to know what gives me the right to speak up here?" Without breaking eye contact with Victoria, he reached for the sleeve of his shirt. Slowly, deliberately, he rolled it up past his elbow, revealing his forearm. The entire bus seemed to lean forward to see what he was showing them. There on his skin in black ink was a tattoo that told a story. It wasn't decorative, wasn't artistic, wasn't something he had gotten on a whim during a night out with friends. It was a memorial, a tribute, a permanent reminder of something that had changed his life forever. The tattoo showed a military unit patch, the 1st Infantry Division. Below it were coordinates, numbers that marked a specific place on Earth where something significant had happened. And below that were 2 words that made Victoria's face go pale when she read them. Saving grace. Michael's voice was steady when he explained what she was looking at. This tattoo represents the most important day of my military career. The day my unit was pinned down by enemy fire in Afghanistan. The day we were taking casualties and running out of ammunition and facing the very real possibility that none of us were going home. He looked directly at Thomas, then back at Victoria. Our commanding officer called in artillery support. Danger close coordinates that would land shells within meters of our position. It was our only chance, but it required someone with experience. Someone who had done it before. Someone who could guide those shells in with precision that could save lives or end them, depending on how good they were at their job. The bus had gone completely silent. Even Victoria had stopped talking, her mouth hanging open as she began to understand what she was hearing. The forward observer who volunteered for that mission was a retired soldier. Someone who had served his time and earned his discharge, but came back as a civilian contractor because he believed in the mission, because he knew his skills were needed, because he wasn't the kind of man who could sit safely at home while younger soldiers faced dangers he had already survived. Michael rolled his sleeve up higher, revealing more of the tattoo. More details that told more of the story. For 6 hours, that man guided artillery fire with surgical precision, adjusting coordinates by meters, calling in strikes that landed so close to our position that we could feel the heat from the explosions. Every adjustment was perfect. Every call was exactly right. By the time the enemy pulled back, we had 0 casualties, 0 deaths. Everyone went home to their families because one man was willing to put himself at risk to save strangers. Victoria was backing away, now understanding flooding her face as she realized where this story was heading. The coordinates on my tattoo marked that exact spot. The place where I learned what real courage looks like. The place where I saw what it means to serve others even when you don't have to. Even when no one will thank you. Even when the only reward is knowing you did the right thing. Michael looked at Thomas, who was staring at him with recognition dawning in his clouded eyes. I never got the chance to thank him properly. Never got to tell him what that day meant to me and my brothers. Never got to explain that he saved more than just our lives. He saved our families from grief. Our children from growing up without fathers. Our wives from becoming widows. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the bus. His name was Thomas Chun, forward observer, 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam veteran, the man you've been trying to humiliate for the past 10 minutes. The silence was absolute. Every passenger was staring. Every phone was recording. Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor of the bus. Thomas finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Michael Rodriguez, he said. I remember you. Skinny kid from Texas. Always worried about your little sister back home. Michael nodded, tears forming in his eyes. She's in college now, Mr. Chun. Pre-med. She wants to be a doctor. Save lives like you saved mine. Thomas smiled for the first time since getting on the bus. I'm proud of you, son. Proud of the man you became. Proud of the soldier you were. Michael moved to the seat next to Thomas, ignoring the fact that it meant he would have to stand for the rest of his trip. He sat down and looked up at Victoria, who was still standing frozen in the aisle. This man is a hero, he said quietly. Not because he's old. Not because he's disabled. Not because he needs our sympathy. But because when his country called, he answered. When his fellow soldiers needed him, he was there. When the choice was between his safety and doing what was right, he chose right every single time. He stood up again, facing Victoria directly. You want to talk about contributing to society? This man contributed more in one day than most people do in their entire lives. You want to talk about earning respect? He earned it with blood and sacrifice and courage under fire. You want to talk about who deserves to sit in that seat? There isn't a person on this bus who deserves it more than he does. Victoria tried to speak, tried to defend herself, tried to explain that she hadn't known. But the words wouldn't come. She had revealed something about herself that couldn't be taken back. Had shown everyone, including herself, what she really believed about worth and dignity and the value of human life. Other passengers were standing now, not to confront Victoria, but to show respect to Thomas. An elderly woman offered him water from her bottle. A college student asked if there was anything he needed. A businessman quietly apologized for not speaking up sooner. The bus driver Marcus Williams finally spoke up from the front. "Mr. Chun," he called back. "You ride this route regular. Never knew you were famous." Thomas chuckled softly. "Not famous, Marcus. Just old. Just tired. Just trying to get to my appointment on time." Michael shook his head. "No, sir. You're more than that. You're the reason I'm alive. The reason my buddies went home to their families. The reason I got to meet my nephew and walk my sister down the aisle at her wedding and have all the experiences that would have been stolen if you hadn't been there that day." He looked around the bus at the other passengers. "This is what a hero looks like," he said. "Not always young. Not always strong. Not always wearing a uniform. Sometimes heroes are elderly men riding the bus to medical appointments. Sometimes they're quiet and humble and prefer not to talk about the things they've done. Sometimes they need our help and our respect not because they're asking for it, but because they've earned it." Victoria finally found her voice, but it was small and shaky. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Thomas looked at her with the same kindness he had shown throughout the entire confrontation. "It's all right, ma'am. You couldn't have known. But maybe next time you'll think twice before assuming you know someone's story." The bus pulled up to the Veterans Hospital stop. Thomas stood slowly, using his cane for support. Michael stood with him, offering his arm for stability. "Can I walk you and Mr. Chin?" Michael asked. "I've got an appointment here too." Thomas smiled. "I'd like that, son. I'd like that very much." As they prepared to get off the bus, Victoria stepped forward. "Mr. Chin," she said, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you gratitude. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you did for these young men. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Thomas paused at the door of the bus. "Ma'am," he said, "we all make mistakes. We all have bad days. What matters is what we do next. How we treat people tomorrow. Whether we choose to see the best in others or the worst." Michael and Thomas walked off the bus together. Two generations of soldiers sharing a moment of connection that transcended age and time and the gulf between war zones and civilian life. The bus pulled away from the stop, but the atmosphere inside had changed permanently. Passengers were talking to each other, sharing stories, looking at the strangers around them with new eyes and new understanding. Victoria sat down in an empty seat near the back. She pulled out her phone and deleted the video she had been recording. Instead, she Googled Thomas Chin's name and spent the rest of her trip reading about his military service, about the medals he had earned, about the lives he had saved, about the quiet dignity with which he had carried his burden for more than 50 years. At the Veterans Hospital, Michael walked Thomas to his appointment. They exchanged phone numbers, made plans to meet for coffee, talked about staying in touch, about being there for each other, about the brotherhood that connected them across decades and generations. Thomas's doctor was amazed by his improved mood. His blood pressure was better than it had been in months. His spirits were higher. He seemed somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Michael's appointment went well too. He talked to his counselor about the encounter on the bus, about how good it felt to honor someone who had made a difference in his life, about how important it was to speak up when people were being treated unfairly. Word of the encounter spread through social media within hours. The video that other passengers had recorded went viral. Comments poured in from veterans and civilians alike. Most were supportive, praising Michael for standing up to bullying and honoring Thomas's service. But the real impact wasn't measured in likes or shares. It was measured in changed hearts, in conversations that happened around dinner tables, in people looking twice before judging strangers, in the understanding that everyone carries invisible stories and everyone deserves basic dignity and respect. Victoria Ashford went home that night and called her father, a Korean War veteran she had never asked about his service. They talked for 2 hours. She learned things about him that changed how she saw not just him, but all the elderly people she encountered in her daily life. She started volunteering at the Veterans Hospital on weekends, started a legal aid clinic for veterans dealing with benefits issues, started treating the people around her with the respect and kindness that everyone deserves, but too few receive. Thomas Chin made a new friend that day. Michael visited him regularly. They went to baseball games together, shared stories about their service, talked about life and loss and the bonds that connect people who have faced danger together. Michael got the closure he had been seeking for years, the chance to say thank you, the opportunity to honor someone who had made the ultimate difference in his life, the satisfaction of standing up for someone who deserved better than what he was receiving. Sometimes heroes wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry weapons. Sometimes they march in parades and receive medals and get their pictures in newspapers. But sometimes heroes are quiet elderly men riding the bus to medical appointments. Sometimes they're young soldiers who speak up when others stay silent. Sometimes they're ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when the moment demands it. The connection between Michael Rodriguez and Thomas Chin started with a tattoo, but it grew into something more important. A friendship, a bridge between generations. A reminder that service doesn't end with discharge papers and sacrifice doesn't diminish with age. This story was brought to you by the Silent Ranks. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose quiet courage made a difference in ways they might never know? Someone who earned your respect through actions rather than words? Tell us in the comments about the unsung heroes in your life. The people who served others without expecting anything in return. The quiet guardians who made sacrifices that others took for granted. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you think we need more connections between generations, more respect for those who served, and more courage to speak up when others are being mistreated, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're building a community that recognizes heroism in all its forms, that honors service wherever we find it, that chooses to see the dignity in every person regardless of age or appearance or circumstances. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of a movement that believes everyone has a story worth telling and everyone deserves to be treated with respect. We'll see you in the next story.